Chapter 1. The final stroke of midnight. The great clock in the drawing-room of Blackwood Hall struck midnight, its chimes reverberating through the cavernous corridors. The old house, standing against the moonlit sky like a relic of another age, seemed to shudder, as though it sensed what was to come. The evening had begun like any other in the household of Edgar Cavendish, the formidable industrialist, whose wealth had been built upon the sprawling railway empire his father had founded. It was a gathering of select company, no more than 8 guests, each with some connection to the master of the house. The occasion, nothing out of the ordinary, a weekend retreat, invitations sent under the guise of cordial hospitality. Yet beneath the surface, there were always tensions in the presence of Edgar Cavendish. His word was law, his authority unquestioned, and those who dared challenge him soon found themselves wishing they had not. The last to see him alive had been Emily Wren, the timid maid who had carried in his nightly tea. It had been a peculiar request. Mr. Cavendish rarely took tea before retiring, but Emily, trained to obey without question, had done as she was told. She had seen him there, sitting at his great mahogany desk, the dim candlelight making his stern features even more severe. He'd been holding something small in his hands, an hourglass, its slender frame barely visible in the gloom. Emily had set down the tray with trembling hands, mumbling a soft, "Good night, sir." Edgar had not looked up. He had merely flipped the hourglass over and muttered, "Time never waits, girl. Remember that." She had left the study then, scurrying down the corridor, and minutes later, the scream had shattered the night. The parlor doors burst open as Lady Helena Cavendish rose from her seat, the faintest hint of irritation flashing across her otherwise serene features. She was a woman of controlled emotions, cold elegance sculpted into human form. "What was that?" she asked, turning toward the grand staircase, where a second, smaller cry echoed. Charles Denham, the family's legal advisor, set down his brandy glass and exchanged a sharp glance with Julian Forsyth, Lady Helena's nephew. The two men rushed toward the sound, followed by Miss Beatrice Holloway, Edgar's dedicated secretary, and Dr. Alistair Morton, an old family friend. The corridor leading to Edgar Cavendish's study was dimly lit, the flickering gas lamps casting distorted shadows on the walls. Emily Wren, pale as a ghost, stood trembling outside the study door. He's dead," she stammered, eyes wide with terror. Denham pushed past her, his keen legal mind already shifting into a mode of calculation. The door creaked open, revealing the master of the house slumped over his desk. The first thing they noticed was the hourglass, toppled onto its side, its contents spilled like fine white dust across the polished surface. Edgar's right hand still clutched the brass frame of the glass, as if he had made some final effort to hold on to it before death claimed him. His face, frozen in an expression of rigid surprise, suggested that the end had come swiftly. On the carpet beneath the desk, a shattered teacup lay in fragments, its amber contents seeping into the fibers. The bitter scent of bergamot and something sharper, something acrid, lingered in the air. Dr. Morton moved swiftly to examine the body. He pressed 2 fingers against Edgar's throat, waiting for a pulse that would never come. "He's gone," Morton said at last, glancing up. His voice carried a note of finality. Denham reached down, lifting Edgar's limp hand. "Still warm. It can't have been more than a few minutes." Lady Helena, who had remained curiously silent until now, stepped forward, her gaze fixed on her husband's lifeless form. If she felt any great grief, she did not show it. Instead, she exhaled softly and murmured, "Poison." Denham frowned. "What makes you say that?" Helena gestured at the broken teacup. "He wasn't expecting to die, or he wouldn't have been drinking tea so calmly. And look at his expression. It wasn't a struggle, it was shock. Sudden, inevitable." Dr. Morton nodded slowly. "It does seem likely. Strychnine perhaps, or cyanide. Both act quickly." Julian Forsyth, who had been standing uneasily near the doorway, let out a nervous chuckle. Well, well, Uncle Edgar, I always thought you'd outlive us all. Helena turned to him sharply. Have some respect. Julian raised his hands in mock surrender but said nothing more. His flippancy was a defense mechanism, though few in the room had the patience for it. Miss Beatrice Holloway, Edgar's long-serving secretary, had been silent until now. She stepped forward, her normally composed face betraying a flicker of anxiety. Mr. Cavendish had enemies, she murmured. Many enemies. Denham cast a glance around the room. Or perhaps, Miss Holloway, the enemy was much closer than we think. A tense silence followed. Somewhere beyond the house, the hoot of an owl broke the night air. The assembled company remained frozen, each privately contemplating what this death meant for them. And then, as if summoned by fate itself, the unmistakable sound of careful footsteps echoed from the grand staircase. Hercule Poirot had arrived. His figure was small, almost unimposing at first glance. But the moment he entered the room, his presence expanded, commanding attention, without a single word spoken. He was dressed impeccably as always, his mustache groomed to perfection. His keen green eyes, that piercing gaze that saw more than it revealed, swept the scene with meticulous precision. Messieurs, mesdames, Poirot said, his voice as smooth as silk. I believe I have arrived at precisely the right moment. Dr. Morton exhaled in relief. Poirot, thank God you're here. Edgar. Poirot lifted a delicate hand. No, no, mon ami. Say nothing yet. First, I observe. And so he did. With a slow, deliberate step, Poirot moved about the study. His eyes flitted over the spilled sand of the hourglass, the teacup shards, the stiffening hand of Edgar Cavendish. He paused over the body, then turned sharply, his gaze locking onto each of the guests in turn. Tell me, he said at last, who amongst you had reason to see this man dead? No one answered, but in Poirot's experience, silence was always louder than words. Chapter 2. The gathering of suspects. The silence in the study was suffocating, thick with unspoken truths, and the weight of Edgar Cavendish's lifeless form. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, rattling the windows like ghostly fingers tapping for entry. Inside, however, it was Poirot's voice, calm, deliberate and ever so precise, that held dominion over the room. He took a slow step forward, his patent leather shoes clicking softly against the polished floor. His gaze moved from one face to the next, taking in the minute flickers of unease, the hastily masked expressions of fear, calculation, and perhaps even guilt. It is always an unfortunate business, Poirot murmured, when a man meets his end so suddenly. N'est-ce pas? Nobody responded. More unfortunate still, he continued, when the manner of his death suggests intervention. A shudder passed through Emily Wren, the maid, who still lingered near the doorway, wringing her apron in trembling fingers. Poirot turned to her first. Mademoiselle, you were the last person to see Monsieur Cavendish alive, yes? Emily hesitated, glancing around as though hoping someone might rescue her from the scrutiny. When none did, she swallowed hard and nodded. Yes, sir. I brought in his tea just as he asked. Ah. Poirot steepled his fingers. Just as he asked. Tell me, this was unusual. She bit her lip. It was. Mr. Cavendish never took tea before bed. He usually had a brandy, and yet tonight he asked for tea. Poirot's voice was light, but his eyes were sharp. Did he seem distressed? Emily hesitated. Not exactly, sir, but he was. He was holding that hourglass. Several eyes flicked toward the overturned hourglass on the desk. It spilled grains, forming an irregular pattern across the wood. Poirot nodded thoughtfully. Tell me, mademoiselle, did you prepare the tea yourself? Emily shook her head quickly. No, sir, it was Miss Holloway who fixed it. I only brought it in. At this, Poirot turned his attention to Beatrice Holloway, the late Edgar Cavendish's long-serving secretary. She had been silent thus far, standing rigid with her hands clasped in front of her sharp features unreadable. "Mademoiselle Holloway," Poirot said smoothly. "It was you who made the tea." Beatrice inclined her head. "Yes, Mr. Poirot. Mr. Cavendish rang for it personally." "Did he specify a particular kind?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Yes. Earl Grey." A faint smile curved Poirot's lips. "Curious." Dr. Morton, standing near the desk, let out a sigh. "Poirot, with all due respect, I don't see the need for this questioning. It's quite clear the tea was poisoned." "Ah, but is it?" Poirot countered, arching a brow. "Forgive me, doctor, but you are certain of this?" Morton hesitated, then gestured toward the body. "Look at him. The suddenness, the rigidity. It fits the symptoms of strychnine poisoning. I can send for a toxicology report, of course, but I'd wager my reputation that poison was the method." Poirot nodded approvingly. "You are a man of science, and science has its place. But tell me, doctor, do you believe in coincidence?" "No," Morton replied flatly. "Neither do I," said Poirot. "And yet, here we have a most particular set of coincidences. A man who never takes tea before bed requests it suddenly. He dies only moments later, and beside him an hourglass falls, marking time's passage, as though it, too, plays a role in his death. It is all rather theatrical, is it not?" A hush fell over the room. Julian Forsyth, lounging near the bookcase, smirked. "Are you suggesting Uncle Edgar staged his own death, Poirot? Because that would be quite the trick." Poirot gave him a level look. "No, monsieur. I am suggesting only that we must look beyond what is obvious." Julian chuckled. "Then by all means, Poirot, unravel the great mystery for us." Poirot ignored him and turned to Charles Denham, the legal adviser. "Monsieur Denham, you were also among the first to enter this room. Did you touch anything?" Denham shook his head, only to check for a pulse. "I realized at once he was gone." Poirot tapped a finger against his chin. "And you were here at the invitation of Monsieur Cavendish, yes?" Denham hesitated. "Yes. He asked me to bring some documents regarding his will." At this there was a noticeable reaction from Lady Helena, whose expression stiffened ever, though slightly. Poirot did not miss it. "Ah," he murmured, "a man considering his legacy. A most dangerous time, I have often observed." Helena finally spoke. "Mr. Poirot, this is all very interesting, but surely the police should handle it." Poirot turned to her with a slight bow. "Madame, the police will indeed be involved, but I have found that, when murder is committed in a house such as this, the answer is seldom to be found outside its walls." She met his gaze coolly. "You mean to say you suspect one of us?" Poirot's smile was as polite as it was implacable. "Madame, I suspect everyone." The room settled into a heavy silence. Poirot took a measured breath and looked around. Once more, the movements, the subtle shifts, the small betrayals of expression, he absorbed them all. The hourglass, the tea, the will, all pieces of a puzzle not yet fully formed. At last, he straightened and adjusted his cuffs. "Bon. We shall proceed methodically. The order of events is everything, you see. First," he said, counting off on his fingers, "Monsieur Cavendish requests tea, an unusual departure from habit. Second, the hourglass is found toppled beside him, a symbolic gesture or an accident. Third, he is dead within a moments of consuming his drink." He clasped his hands behind his back. "Now, mes amis, the question before us is this: was the tea poisoned? And if so, by whom?" Nobody spoke, but as Poirot had long ago learned, it was not always the spoken words that held the answer, but rather the silences between them. Chapter 3. The First Threads of Deception. A long silence followed Poirot's declaration. The gathered household seemed to collectively hold their breath, as though afraid that even the faintest exhalation might betray them. Outside, The wind howled against the manor's tall windows, its ghostly wail threading through the corridors. The fire in the hearth crackled, casting shifting shadows across the high bookshelves, and still, no one spoke. Poirot let the moment stretch before finally breaking it himself. "Well, mes amis, will you remain silent while I speak to myself?" His voice was light, almost amused, but his sharp eyes held a challenge. Lady Helena was the first to regain her composure. She lifted her chin, her blue eyes steady. "Monsieur Poirot, I fail to see the point of this inquisition. My husband is dead. It is a tragedy. But if he was poisoned, surely the police can determine that soon enough." Poirot regarded her for a moment. "Ah, madame, but what if I tell you that time is of the essence? You see, murderers, how do you say it, get nervous when left waiting. They make mistakes." A flicker of something unreadable passed across her face before she smoothed her expression once more. "Then I suppose you intend to ensure they make one?" Poirot inclined his head. "Just so, madame." He turned his attention back to Beatrice Holloway, the secretary. She had been standing rigidly near the bookshelf, her fingers tracing the spine of a well-worn ledger, though she had yet to open it. "Mademoiselle Holloway," he said, "you prepared the tea. Tell me, was there anything unusual about the process?" Beatrice exhaled, her hands tightening at her sides. "No, Mr. Poirot, I brewed it as I always do. Poured the hot water over the leaves, let it steep, strained it, and sent it up with Emily." "And you are certain, absolutely certain, that no one tampered with it before it was delivered?" She hesitated. It was the briefest of pauses, but Poirot caught it. I don't believe so," she said. "I left it on the silver tray for a moment while I fetched a napkin, but no one was in the kitchen at the time." Poirot's gaze sharpened. "A moment, you say? A minute, perhaps 2? "Less than a minute," Beatrice said quickly. "It was only a few seconds." "And yet," Poirot mused, "in a house such as this, a few seconds can be quite enough, no?" Dr. Morton let out a sigh. "Poirot, do you really think someone could have slipped poison into the tea in that brief span? If they were quick, yes. If they had prepared in advance, certainly." Poirot spread his hands. "Or perhaps it was not the tea at all." A murmur rippled through the room. Julian Forsyth, who had been idly swirling a brandy in his glass, gave a short laugh. "If not the tea, Poirot, then what? My uncle didn't simply will himself into an early grave." Poirot's lips curved into the faintest smile. "You have read the works of Shakespeare, Monsieur Forsyth?" Julian blinked at the sudden shift. "A little. Ah, then you will recall the words of Hamlet. There are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than are dreamt of in your philosophy." Poirot's expression turned thoughtful. "There are always possibilities, mon ami. And it is the work of Hercule Poirot to eliminate the impossible until only the truth remains." He turned toward the desk, where Edgar Cavendish's lifeless body remained slumped in his chair, untouched, since Dr. Morton's initial examination. Poirot's fingers traced the edge of the desk before he gestured toward the hourglass. "The hourglass, for instance. It is most curious." Charles Denham, the lawyer, cleared his throat. "Curious is just an ornament, surely." Poirot picked it up, studying the finely carved frame. "Perhaps. But it is a precise instrument, designed to measure time with exactitude." He turned it over in his hands, watching as the fine grains of sand slipped through the narrow neck. "Yet here we find it overturned, the sands scattered. Tell me, why would a man in his final moments reach for an hourglass?" Silence. "Or," Poirot continued, "did someone else overturn it, as if to mark the moment of his passing?" The implication hung heavy in the air. Lady Helena let out a slow breath. "What are you suggesting, Mr. Poirot?" He set the hourglass down carefully. "That Monsieur Cavendish's death was no ordinary act of poison. There was intent beyond murder. There was meaning. Beatrice Holloway frowned. Meaning? Poirot nodded. Yes, mademoiselle, someone wished to send a message, and I intend to decipher it. His gaze flicked once more to Edgar Cavendish's face, his rigid hands, the traces of pain etched into his features. For now we shall proceed as if poison was the weapon. But let us not be so quick to assume the tea was its only vessel. He turned toward Dr. Morton. Monsieur, you will conduct the necessary tests? The doctor gave a nod. I'll arrange for the coroner to examine the body. We'll know soon enough if it was poison, and if so, what kind. Bon. Poirot dusted his hands lightly. In the meantime, I wish to know more of this household. Each of you had a connection to Monsieur Cavendish, no? Each of you may have reason to see him dead. Julian let out a slow whistle. Well, if you mean to start accusing us, Poirot, at least give us a fair hearing. Poirot inclined his head. You shall have one, monsieur. But the truth it will come whether you wish it or not. His sharp eyes flicked over each suspect in turn, lingering just long enough to plant the seed of unease. The game had begun. Chapter 4. The lies beneath the surface. The storm outside had grown fiercer, rattling the great windows of Cavendish Manor as rain lashed against the glass. Within the dimly lit study, Poirot stood in silent contemplation, his eyes lingering on the lifeless form of Edgar Cavendish. The weight of unspoken truths hung heavy in the air, and though the gathered suspects maintained their composure, Poirot sensed the subtle shifts, the darting glances, the tensed shoulders, the way Lady Helena's fingers tapped lightly against her pearl necklace. He did not speak immediately. He let the silence stretch, knowing that discomfort often unraveled more secrets than direct questioning. Then, with deliberate care, he adjusted the cuffs of his neatly pressed suit and turned to face the group. It is always a most fascinating thing, mes amis, Poirot said at last, his voice soft but firm. When a man dies, the living do not only mourn, they reveal. Julian Forsyth gave a short laugh, though there was little mirth in it. And what exactly are we revealing, Poirot? Poirot's gaze settled on him. That, Monsieur Forsyth, remains to be seen. Poirot moved with careful steps toward the desk, his fingers hovering over the scattered grains of sand from the overturned hourglass. He studied them with the keen attention of a man who saw significance where others saw only disorder. This hourglass, he mused, it was not toppled by accident, it was placed deliberately just so. He pointed to the uneven spread of sand. Notice how the grains are disturbed, pushed outward as though knocked with force. Dr. Morton frowned. You think Edgar reached for it in his final moments? Poirot inclined his head. It is a possibility, though not the only one. But consider, mes amis, the symbolism of an hourglass. It measures time, yes, a countdown, a warning. Why would a dying man concern himself with such a thing? Beatrice Holloway's voice was barely above a whisper, unless he was trying to tell us something. Poirot smiled approvingly. Exactement, mademoiselle, a final message perhaps. Lady Helena exhaled, clearly impatient. Monsieur Poirot, I fail to see how grains of sand will solve a murder. Poirot's expression did not change, but his voice held an edge of steel. And yet, madame, I assure you they shall. For in murder it is not always the grand gestures that reveal the truth. It is the smallest details. The first interviews. Satisfied for the moment, Poirot turned away from the desk and gestured toward the chairs by the fireplace. Now, miss, we shall talk. One by one I will hear you, and perhaps in your words, the truth will begin to reveal itself. This is absurd, Charles Denham muttered. I trust you don't intend to interrogate us like criminals. Oh, but Monsieur Denham, I intend precisely that, Poirot said lightly. For among you, I am quite certain, sits a murderer. A chill settled over the room. No one spoke. Poirot gestured to Beatrice Holloway. "Mademoiselle, if you please, let us begin with you." She hesitated, glancing around as though seeking reassurance, then stepped forward and took a seat. Her posture was rigid, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Poirot studied her a moment before speaking. "You were Monsieur Cavendish's secretary. For how long?" "5 years," she answered quickly. "He hired me shortly after his wife passed away." "Ah, yes. And tell me, how was your relationship with him?" Beatrice frowned slightly. "Professional. He was demanding, meticulous, but never unkind." Poirot tapped a finger against his chin. "Demanding, you say? And yet I sense in your tone that there is more. Perhaps you resented this." She shook her head. "No, not at all. I respected Mr. Cavendish. He was a complicated man, but he was always fair to me. And on the evening of his death, you were the last to see him before his tea was served." Beatrice hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, I brought him some documents to sign just before dinner. He seemed tired but otherwise normal." "Did he say anything unusual?" A pause. He did say something strange. He asked me if I believed in fate." Poirot's eyebrows lifted slightly. "Fate?" "Yes. He said something about time running out, and how some things are beyond our control. It was odd, but I thought he was just being reflective." Poirot exchanged a glance with Hastings, who had been quietly taking notes. "And after that, I left the study. That was the last time I saw him alive." Poirot nodded thoughtfully. "Merci, Mademoiselle Holloway. That will be all for now." Beatrice rose quickly and stepped back, looking pale. Poirot turned next to Charles Denham, the lawyer. "Monsieur Denham, if you please." Denham, clearly displeased, settled into the chair. "Let's make this quick, Poirot." Poirot smiled faintly. "But of course, monsieur. Now, tell me, when did you last speak with Monsieur Cavendish?" Denham pursed his lips. "Yesterday afternoon. He had me draft a new version of his will." A murmur rippled through the group. Poirot's expression remained impassive, but his eyes glinted with interest. "A new will, you say? And what changes did it contain?" Denham hesitated. "That, Poirot, is confidential." Poirot steepled his fingers. "Ah, but you see, monsieur, the confidentiality of the dead is a most fragile thing, and in a murder investigation it is often shattered." Denham exhaled sharply. "Fine." He intended to change the primary beneficiary. A beat of silence. "And who was the new beneficiary?" Poirot asked, his voice deceptively mild. Denham glanced at Lady Helena. "His nephew, Julian Forsyth." All eyes turned to Julian, who looked equally surprised and uneasy. "Me?" he echoed. "That's impossible. He would never—" "Oh, but he did," Denham interrupted. "And if he had signed it, the entirety of his estate would have gone to you." Julian looked stunned. Lady Helena's face had gone pale. The tension in the room became almost suffocating. Poirot leaned forward slightly. "Tell me, Monsieur Denham, was the will signed before his death?" Denham shook his head. "No. He wanted to think on it overnight." Poirot allowed a small smile. "Then, mes amis, we must ask ourselves, did someone wish to hasten his decision? Or perhaps, to ensure he never made it?" A heavy silence fell. Poirot's eyes swept over the gathered faces, and for the first time, he saw what he had been waiting for. Fear. Chapter 5. Secrets in the candlelight. The glow of the fireplace cast flickering shadows along the walls of Cavendish Manor's grand study. The air was thick with tension, the scent of aged wood and rain-dampened fabric mingling with the weight of unspoken truths. Hercule Poirot remained seated in his usual composed manner, his small, precise hands resting atop his walking stick. His gaze, sharp as ever, flitted between the faces before him, reading the micro-expressions, the subtle tics that betrayed unease. Julian Forsyth had yet to recover from the revelation that he had been named the new heir. His fingers fidgeted with the cuff of his sleeve, his brow furrowed in visible disbelief. Lady Helena's face had gone ghostly pale, her elegant posture now stiff with tension. Charles Denham, the lawyer, sat rigid, lips pressed into a thin line, while Beatrice Holloway, though still shaken, seemed to be listening more intently now, as though piecing together fragments of a puzzle she hadn't even realized existed. It was Dr. Morton who finally broke the silence. "Poirot, you can't seriously be suggesting that Edgar was murdered because of his will." Poirot merely lifted an eyebrow. "You find it unlikely, Monsieur Docteur?" "I find it premature." Morton shifted uncomfortably. "We still don't even know for certain that he was murdered." "No?" Poirot tilted his head. "And yet, Doctor, when you examined the body, was there not something that troubled you?" Dr. Morton's lips parted slightly, but no words emerged. "Let me be of assistance," Poirot continued smoothly. "You found no obvious signs of violence, no wound upon the body, no immediate cause of death, yet the teacup beside him was shattered upon the floor. The hourglass overturned, the scene one of disorder." Morton exhaled. "That doesn't prove poison, Poirot." Poirot leaned forward slightly. "Perhaps not, but it proves one thing with certainty. Monsieur Cavendish did not die peacefully." A murmur ran through the room. Lady Helena clutched her pearl necklace tightly, as if drawing some comfort from its smooth surface. "You believe he was poisoned?" Beatrice Holloway asked hesitantly. Poirot did not answer immediately. Instead, he turned his attention back to Dr. Morton. "Doctor, you are a man of medicine. Tell me, when you saw his body, did you observe anything unusual about his expression?" Morton's frown deepened. "Now that you mention it, yes." His face was frozen in an almost startled expression. His hands were clenched, as though he had seized up. "Precisely." Poirot gave a satisfied nod. "It is a most peculiar thing, is it not? A man sitting alone in his study appearing to die of natural causes, yet leaving behind the visage of one who met death suddenly." "You think he knew he was being poisoned?" asked Julian Forsyth, his voice tight. Poirot tapped a finger against his temple. "It is possible. Or perhaps small share he did not realize it until it was too late." Hastings, who had been taking notes all the while, finally spoke. "Poirot, if he was poisoned, how would it have been administered?" Poirot's gaze flickered to the broken teacup. "Ah, mon ami, consider. What is the one thing every person takes without question, especially in a house such as this? Tea." Hastings nodded in understanding. "Exactement. If poison was introduced, the tea is a most convenient vehicle." Poirot turned his attention to Beatrice. "Mademoiselle Holloway, who prepared the tea that evening?" Beatrice blinked in surprise. "The housemaid, Elsie. She brought it up on a tray, but Mr. Cavendish preferred to pour it himself. He had a particular way of doing things." "And was the tea served to anyone else?" Beatrice hesitated. "No. He preferred to drink alone in his study before dinner." Poirot's eyes darkened. "Then it is most unfortunate for him that he did." Lady Helena let out an exasperated sigh. "This is all speculation. You have no proof of poisoning, and yet you weave a web of accusations." Poirot turned to her smoothly. "Ah, but madame, I accuse no one, yet." Before anyone could respond, there was a sudden knock at the door. It creaked open, revealing a young maid, her hands trembling slightly. It was Elsie. "Begging your pardon, sir," she said nervously, "but I remembered something strange about Mr. Cavendish's tea." All eyes turned to her. Poirot's expression remained calm, but his interest was undeniable. "Go on, mademoiselle." Elsie hesitated, then took a deep breath. "I brought the tea up as I always do, but when I set it on the tray outside his study door, I saw someone else pass by, someone who stopped and lingered there for a moment." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Who was it?" Elsie swallowed hard. It was Mr. Denham, the lawyer. A sharp intake of breath swept through the room. Denham, who had been impassive until now, suddenly sat up straighter. "This is ridiculous. I was merely passing through the hall." "Were you?" Poirot's voice was mild, yet the undertone was unmistakable. "Or did you perhaps pause to ensure that a certain document remained unsigned?" Denham's face darkened. "Poirot, if you think I had anything to do with this—" "I think, monsieur," Poirot interrupted smoothly, "that the time has come to look closely at every detail. And as you know, the smallest detail can unravel the greatest of lies." Denham's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Poirot stood, adjusting his cuffs. "Mes amis, I believe it is time to pay a visit to the kitchen. For if there was poison, we must discover its source." As he strode toward the door, the flickering candlelight illuminated his expression, one of sharp calculation and unwavering determination. The game had truly begun. Chapter 6. The taste of treachery. The air in the Cavendish Manor kitchen was thick with the lingering aroma of freshly baked bread and damp stone. A single lantern cast long, wavering shadows across the worn wooden counters, illuminating the polished brass of the kettles and the delicate china stored neatly on the shelves. Poirot stood in the center of the room, hands clasped behind his back, his gaze sweeping over the space with quiet precision. Hastings, standing beside him, watched as Mrs. Hayward, the head housekeeper, wrung her hands nervously. Elsie, the young maid who had claimed to see Mr. Denham near the tea-tray, stood near the door, shifting anxiously from foot to foot. The tension in the air was palpable. "Mrs. Hayward," Poirot began, his voice smooth but firm, "you oversee all matters in the kitchen, n'est-ce pas?" The housekeeper nodded. "Yes, sir. I manage the meals, the staff, and the supplies." "Très bien. Then you would know if any unusual ingredients or substances have recently been brought into the house." Mrs. Hayward hesitated, glancing at Elsie, then at the neatly arranged jars of spices and loose tea leaves on the counter. "No, sir, nothing out of the ordinary. We have the same supplies as always: flour, sugar, salts, and teas. If anything had been tampered with, I would have noticed." Poirot's gaze landed on the tea canister, a simple but elegant ceramic container with gold trim. He stepped forward, running a finger along its edge. "And this is the blend Mr. Cavendish preferred?" "Yes, sir. A special Darjeeling blend, imported." He drank nothing else. Poirot opened the canister and inhaled deeply, his brow furrowing. In thought, he handed it to Hastings. "Tell me, mon ami, do you detect anything unusual?" Hastings took a hesitant sniff. "Smells like tea to me, Poirot." Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. "Indeed. But tell me, Mrs. Hayward, where do you store any medicinal items? Herbal remedies, sleeping draughts, or even rat poison?" The housekeeper's face tightened. "We don't keep poisons in the kitchen, sir, but there are some remedies in the pantry. Lavender, valerian root, and laudanum for sleeping." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Ah, and who has access to these items?" "Only myself, Dr. Morton when he visits, and Lady Helena when she requires something." At the mention of Lady Helena, Hastings exchanged a glance with Poirot. "And Mr. Cavendish, he did not take any sleeping draughts?" Poirot pressed. Mrs. Hayward shook her head. "Not that I know of, sir, but he did suffer from headaches. Sometimes he took a little tincture for them." Poirot pursed his lips deep in thought. He turned to Elsie. "Mademoiselle, the night of the murder, did you see anyone else near the tea before Mr. Cavendish took it?" Elsie swallowed hard, clearly struggling with something. I already told you, sir. Mr. Denham was in the corridor." "Yes, but was he alone?" Poirot's gaze was piercing. Elsie hesitated. "Well, no. A few minutes later Lady Helena passed by as well. She went into the study briefly but left before the tea was taken in." A murmur ran through the room. Hastings frowned. "Lady Helena, What business did she have in the study? Poirot nodded approvingly at Hastings' question, but turned to Elsie instead. You are certain of this, mademoiselle? Lady Helena entered the study before the tea was delivered? Elsie nodded. Yes, sir. She was carrying something, a small bottle, I think, but I didn't think anything of it at the time. Poirot exchanged a knowing glance with Hastings. Most interesting. At that moment, heavy footsteps echoed from the corridor. Dr. Morton appeared in the doorway, his face troubled. Poirot, I have something to report. Poirot turned sharply. Oui, mon ami, Morton exhaled, rubbing his forehead. I examined Mr. Cavendish's body again. I found something I initially overlooked. The room fell silent. His fingernails, Morton continued, they were slightly discolored. It's a common sign of alkaloid poisoning. A sharp intake of breath rippled through those present. Hastings stiffened. Poirot, that means... Poirot interrupted smoothly. Monsieur Cavendish was indeed poisoned. He turned to Elsie. And now, mademoiselle, your observation becomes most vital. A bottle, you say, tell me. Did you see what Lady Helena did with it? Elsie bit her lip. She left it on his desk, sir, right before she walked out. A hush fell over the room. Poirot, ever composed, smoothed the front of his impeccable jacket. Then, mes amis, we must return to the study, for I believe the truth is hidden in plain sight. With that, he turned and strode from the kitchen, his keen mind already piecing together the next step in his investigation. Chapter 7. The bottle on the desk. The study, dimly lit by the gray afternoon light filtering through the heavy curtains, bore an air of solemnity. The ornate mahogany desk at the room's center stood like an altar to unfinished business, papers neatly arranged, a silver inkstand gleaming dully, and beside them, a single glass bottle. Poirot stepped forward with measured precision, his polished shoes barely making a sound against the Persian rug. Hastings, following closely behind, eyed the bottle with growing suspicion. Dr. Morton stood near the door, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. There it is, murmured Hastings, nodding toward the desk, the bottle Elsie saw Lady Helena place before she left. Poirot reached out and picked it up with delicate fingers, examining it under the lamplight. The glass was clear, revealing a faint amber residue clinging to the inside. The label, faded but legible, read, "Tincture of opium, to be taken sparingly for pain or sleeplessness. Laudanum," Dr. Morton muttered, stepping forward. "A common enough remedy, but in excess it could be lethal." Poirot turned the bottle slowly between his fingers. "And yet, mon cher docteur, we must not leap to conclusions. This bottle, it was here, visible, left on the desk. Why?" Hastings frowned. "You mean if someone meant to poison Cavendish, why leave the evidence out in the open?" Poirot nodded approvingly. "Précisément, Hastings. To poison with laudanum, one must mix it into a liquid, tea for instance. If this was the means of the crime, then surely our murderer would have concealed it, n'est-ce pas?" Dr. Morton considered. "Unless, of course, it was meant to be discovered, to mislead." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Ah, a most interesting possibility, but we must not let ourselves be distracted by surface appearances. Instead, let us ask, who had reason to ensure that this bottle was seen?" Poirot set the bottle down and turned sharply on his heel. "Hastings, you observed Lady Helena when she first learned of her husband's death, did you not?" Hastings nodded. "She seemed distressed, of course, but controlled, almost too controlled." Poirot tapped a finger against his temple. "Exactement. And yet, we now learn that she was in this very room shortly before the tea was served, placing this bottle here. What does that tell us?" Hastings hesitated. "That she wanted it to be found." Poirot smiled faintly. "Perhaps. But consider another possibility. What if Lady Helena, upon entering this room, found this bottle already here?" Dr. Morton raised a brow. You mean someone else left it first? Précisément. And she, seeing it, feared what it might mean. Poirot's voice was calm, yet electric with suggestion. What would any devoted wife do in such a moment? Hastings frowned. She might try to remove it, hide it, to protect someone. Poirot gave a small nod, or she might simply leave it, unwilling to tamper with what she does not yet understand. A heavy silence fell. The implications hung in the air, unspoken, but potent. If Lady Helena had not placed the bottle there as part of a deception, then the true murderer had anticipated her reaction, either to make her look guilty or to create confusion. We must speak with Lady Helena at once, Poirot declared. The drawing room was a picture of refined melancholy. Heavy drapes muffled the outside world, and a low fire crackled in the hearth. Lady Helena sat in an armchair near the window, her posture composed, but her fingers worrying at the hem of her sleeve. Poirot approached with gentle but firm purpose. Madame, forgive me for intruding upon your grief, but I must ask you something most important. Lady Helena turned her gaze to him, eyes shadowed. Yes, Monsieur Poirot. The night of your husband's death, you entered the study. You left a bottle on his desk. Poirot watched her closely. Why? Her breath caught. She looked down as if composing herself, then met his gaze. Because it was already there. Hastings and Morton exchanged a look. Poirot remained still, his expression unreadable. You did not bring it with you, he pressed. She shook her head. No. I saw it sitting on his desk and it unnerved me. I knew Lawrence used laudanum for his headaches, but he was always careful with the dosage. Poirot's voice was gentle but persistent. Did you touch the bottle, madame? A pause, then barely a whisper. Yes. Poirot tilted his head. And what did you intend to do? She swallowed. I thought, for a moment, I thought of taking it away, hiding it, but then I realized that would only make things worse if someone saw me, so I left it. Poirot studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Merci, madame. You have been most helpful. Lady Helena exhaled slowly, tension still evident in her posture. You believe me, don't you? Poirot smiled faintly. I believe that you are telling the truth. And the truth, madame, is always the beginning of justice. As Poirot and Hastings stepped into the corridor, Hastings let out a low whistle. So someone else put the bottle there first. But who? Poirot adjusted his cuffs, his expression keen. That, Hastings, is what we must discover. But consider. Who stood to benefit from implicating Lady Helena? Hastings rubbed his chin. Denham, perhaps, or someone else in the house, who wished to divert suspicion. Poirot's eyes glinted. And now, mon ami, we must return to the one thing that never lies, the psychology of our suspects. With that, he strode down the hallway, his little, gray cells working furiously toward the unseen truth that lurked just beyond reach. Chapter 8. The chessboard of suspicions. The corridors of Cavendish Manor seemed to close in with an air of silent conspiracy. Poirot and Hastings walked in measured strides, their footsteps softened by the thick Persian carpets. Though the manor was grand, its halls now carried the weight of whispered secrets and unseen eyes. Hastings cast a glance at his friend. Poirot, if Lady Helena did not place the laudanum bottle on the desk, that means the murderer wanted us to believe she had a hand in Cavendish's death. But why? Poirot pressed his fingertips together, his gaze sharp. Hastings, we must see beyond the mere facts. It is not only the act of placing the bottle that interests me, but the intention behind it. Someone, mon ami, is playing a game of misdirection, where each move is made with great calculation. He paused at the bottom of the grand staircase and turned to Hastings. Let us consider who benefits from Lady Helena being suspected. Hastings frowned. It could be Denham, since he's to inherit, or even the servants, if they're hiding something. But the way you put it, Poirot, it almost sounds as if the killer isn't just covering their own tracks. They're setting up a trap. Poirot's lips curled into the faintest of smiles. Précisément, mon ami, a trap indeed. As they turned toward the study once more, they encountered Middleton, the ever-composed butler. He was dusting an ornate vase, his gloved hands careful and practiced. Seeing Poirot and Hastings, he inclined his head. Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings. Poirot studied the butler for a moment. Middleton, you have been with the Cavendish household for many years, non? Middleton nodded. 17 years, sir. And you know its inhabitants well. One might say so, sir. Though I make it a habit never to presume too much. Poirot's eyes twinkled. Very wise. Tell me, on the night of Lord Cavendish's death, do you recall anyone entering the study after Lady Helena? Middleton hesitated. Only slightly, but enough for Poirot to notice. After Lady Helena, sir? No, I do not recall seeing anyone enter. Hastings let out a frustrated sigh. That brings us back to nothing. Poirot, however, smiled faintly. Ah, Hastings, but sometimes it is what is not said that speaks the loudest. Middleton's brow furrowed. I beg your pardon, sir. Poirot turned to him. You say you did not see anyone enter after Lady Helena. But did you hear anything? The butler hesitated again, this time for longer. Well, sir, there was something, a faint creak of the floorboards perhaps. I recall hearing it not long after Lady Helena left. I assumed it was just the house settling. Poirot's gaze sharpened. And yet, mon ami, the house does not settle with intent. This creak, it came from inside the study. Middleton nodded, slowly. Yes, sir. But when I later passed by, the room was empty. Poirot exchanged a glance with Hastings. Then someone else was there. Someone who waited in silence before slipping away unnoticed. The discovery sent a ripple through the case. If someone had been in the study after Lady Helena, but had not been seen leaving, it meant they had either left unseen, or concealed themselves within the manor. Hastings looked troubled. But Poirot, that means the killer was taking an enormous risk. If anyone had walked in, Poirot nodded. A risk indeed, but also a necessity. It means that something in that room was crucial enough to warrant such a bold move. And I believe I know what. Poirot turned abruptly and strode toward the study. Hastings followed, curiosity piqued. Inside, the room remained as they had left it, orderly but heavy with the memory of its former occupant. Poirot's sharp eyes scanned the desk, the shelves, the arrangement of objects. We are missing something, Hastings. The laudanum bottle was a diversion, but the true clue is here, somewhere. He moved to the desk, scanned with the utmost delicacy, ran his fingers along its polished surface. Then he paused. Regardez, Hastings. The inkstand. Hastings frowned. What about it? Poirot lifted the lid. Inside, the ink was slightly smudged, the mark of someone having tampered with it. Mon ami, someone dipped a pen in this ink, not long before Cavendish died. But look here, there is no recent letter, no note. Hastings blinked. You think Cavendish wrote something and someone took it? Poirot's voice was quiet but firm. Exactement. A letter? A confession? Or perhaps a warning? Something he wrote just before his death. And our unseen visitor was here to ensure that message was never found. Just as Poirot finished speaking, the door swung open and a breathless maid appeared. Monsieur Poirot, sir. Dr. Morton sent me. He says you must come at once. Poirot turned sharply. What has happened? The maid wrung her hands. It's Mr. Denham, sir. He collapsed in the hallway. Dr. Morton says it might be poison. Hastings paled. Good heavens, another poisoning? Poirot's eyes darkened. No, Hastings, This is not coincidence, it is the murderer striking again. Without another word, Poirot strode out of the room, his mind racing. The pieces of the puzzle were shifting, and the game was reaching its climax. The murderer had made another move, and Poirot was ready to checkmate. Chapter 9. The trap is set. The halls of Cavendish Manor had grown colder. Shadows stretched unnaturally along the walls, as if the house itself conspired to conceal the truth. Poirot and Hastings hurried down the corridor, the urgency of Dr. Morton's summons pressing upon them. At the far end of the hall, they found a small gathering. Denham lay slumped against the wall, his face pale, his breath shallow. Dr. Morton knelt beside him, his medical bag open, while Lady Helena hovered nearby, a trembling hand to her lips. Poirot crouched beside the doctor. "Poison, you say, mon cher doctor?" Dr. Morton nodded grimly. "It appears so. The symptoms are milder than Lord Cavendish's, but similar: light perspiration, disorientation, and weakness." He turned to the maid. "You were the first to find him." The maid, still shaken, nodded. "Yes, sir, I had just stepped out of the kitchen when I saw him stagger and fall." Poirot's gaze swept over Denham's body. His fingers, slightly curled, bore faint ink stains. Poirot's eyes flickered with interest. "Has he spoken?" Dr. Morton shook his head, only muttered something indistinct before he lost consciousness. Poirot leaned in closer. "Perhaps he can still be reached." "Hastings, a moment." Hastings stepped forward. Poirot gestured toward Denham's pocket. "Search it, mon ami, but delicately." Hastings hesitated. "Are you certain, Poirot?" "The poor fellow. I do not wish to steal, Hastings. I wish only to retrieve what the murderer wished to remain hidden." Hastings nodded, and carefully reached into Denham's jacket pocket. His fingers brushed against something. A folded piece of paper. He extracted it, and handed it to Poirot. Poirot unfolded it with great care. His eyes flicked over the scrawled writing, the ink smudged but legible. A single sentence sent a shiver through the air. "I know who killed my uncle." A gasp escaped Lady Helena's lips. "He knew?" Poirot nodded gravely. "It appears so. But see, Hastings, the ink is still fresh. He wrote this mere moments before he was poisoned." Hastings looked alarmed. Then the murderer knew Denham was close to exposing them. Poirot tapped his chin. And they attempted to silence him, but not as successfully as before. It is a desperate move, mon ami. Desperation leads to mistakes." He turned back to Dr. Morton. "Can he recover?" The doctor pursed his lips. "I believe so. His dose must have been weaker, or else administered differently. With proper care he should wake soon." Poirot's gaze darkened. "Then we must ensure he lives long enough to tell us what he knows." Later that evening, Poirot called for an informal gathering in the dining hall. The tension was palpable. Lady Helena sat stiffly at one end, her face drawn. Middleton stood near the door, his hands clasped behind his back. Dr. Morton, weary but composed, observed quietly, and the others, Mrs. Stratton the housekeeper, young Alice the maid, and even the gardener Mr. Finch, shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Poirot surveyed them with a quiet intensity. "Mes amis, it is time to bring matters to light. There is a murderer among us, and that murderer has now struck twice." A murmur rippled through the group. Mrs. Stratton's hands trembled slightly. Alice cast a fearful glance at Lady Helena. "But," Poirot continued, "this second attempt was poorly executed. It was made in haste, and most importantly, it tells us one vital truth. The killer is afraid." Silence fell. Poirot's gaze flicked across each face, observing the minute reactions. A twitch of the lips, a flicker of the eyes, every movement was a puzzle piece. Hastings cleared his throat. "But what I don't understand, Poirot, is why poison was used again." Surely the murderer knew it would raise suspicion. Poirot smiled faintly. Ah, mon ami. But that is precisely the point. The killer wishes for us to believe the poison was simply a terrible coincidence, that it is some tragic curse upon this household. But as I have said before, Poirot does not believe in coincidences. Lady Helena's voice was tight. Do you mean to say the same person who killed Cavendish also tried to kill Denham? Poirot inclined his head. That is my belief, madame. Mrs. Stratton spoke up, her voice wavering. But why would they attempt it so soon? Wouldn't it be risky? Poirot's sharp eyes turned toward her. Ah, madame, but that is where you are mistaken. You see, the murderer was left with no choice. Denham was about to reveal something critical, and so they took the risk. A nervous hush settled over the room. Poirot let the silence stretch, the weight of his words sinking in. Then at last he spoke again. But mes amis, I have set a trap, a very delicate trap. As if on cue, a faint sound echoed down the hallway, the creak of a floorboard. Poirot's eyes flickered with satisfaction. And I do believe our quarry has just taken the bait. He turned sharply to Hastings. Come, mon ami, let us catch a murderer. Poirot strode swiftly toward the corridor, Hastings at his heels. The air was thick with anticipation. The endgame had begun. Chapter 10. Poirot's trap is sprung. The corridor was dimly lit, the flickering glow of the wall sconces casting elongated shadows against the wooden paneling. Poirot moved swiftly yet soundlessly, his patent leather shoes barely making a whisper against the floor. Hastings, following close behind, could hear the faint creaking of a door down the hallway, the sound of someone trying to move unseen. Poirot raised a hand, signaling Hastings to stop. He pointed toward the slightly ajar study door. Inside, a figure moved hurriedly, their silhouette barely visible against the lamplight. Voila! Poirot murmured. The mouse has entered the trap. Hastings clenched his fists. Who is it, Poirot? He whispered. Poirot placed a finger to his lips, then pressed his palm gently against the door and pushed. The study door swung inward, revealing Mrs. Stratton, the housekeeper, bent over the writing desk. Her hands trembled as she rifled through papers, her breath coming in quick gasps. At the sudden intrusion, she spun around, her eyes wide with terror. Monsieur Poirot, I was just tidying. Poirot strode into the room with measured elegance. Ah, madame, a most curious time for tidying, n'est-ce pas? His gaze dropped to the paper she clutched in her hands. And what, may I ask, do you seek so desperately? Mrs. Stratton's grip tightened around the papers. She took a step back as if seeking an escape route. I don't know what you mean. Hastings moved to block the door. I wouldn't advise running, Mrs. Stratton. Her chest rose and fell rapidly. Poirot, ever watchful, studied her with the same keen intensity he reserved for criminals. In their final moments of deception, Madame, there is no need for pretense. You were searching for something. Something Denham left behind. Her breath hitched. Hastings saw her knuckles whiten as she clenched the paper tighter. Poirot extended a hand. Give it to me, s'il vous plaît. She hesitated. Then, as if realizing there was no way out, her shoulders sagged. She slowly extended the crumpled document to Poirot. He smoothed it out and scanned the words with interest. It was a second note in Denham's handwriting, shorter this time, but just as damning. There is something hidden in my uncle's study. The proof is there. Poirot's brows lifted slightly. Ah, so he knew where to look, but alas, he was poisoned before he could act. Mrs. Stratton let out a choked sob. I only wanted to see what he found. I swear I had nothing to do with his poisoning, or with Lord Cavendish's death. Poirot tilted his head. Then tell me, madame, what did you hope to find? Tears streaked down her face. I don't know. But if Denham suspected something, I thought perhaps it could clear my name. You must believe me, Monsieur Poirot. I did not kill anyone. Poirot's expression remained unreadable. We shall see, madame. But for now you must accompany me back to the drawing room. It is time for the final gathering." The household was assembled in the grand drawing room, their faces pale with tension. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows against the high walls. Poirot stood before them, immaculate as ever, his hands clasped before him. He surveyed them all, Lady Helena, Dr. Morton, Middleton, Alice the maid, Mr. Finch and Mrs. Stratton, who now sat wringing her hands in distress. "Mes amis," Poirot began, "we are at the end. The time has come to reveal the truth." A heavy silence fell upon the room. Poirot gestured toward Denham's hastily scrawled note. Our young Mr. Denham discovered something hidden within this very house, but before he could act, he was silenced. However, in his desperation, the murderer made a grave error. Middleton folded his arms. "What error?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "They acted too soon. They tried to eliminate Denham before he had spoken. But mes amis, there was no certainty that Denham would have revealed the truth. In their haste, the murderer has exposed themselves." Lady Helena's lips parted in shock. "You mean to say you know who it is?" Poirot inclined his head. "Oui, madame, and I shall tell you after one final act of theatre." He turned abruptly to Hastings. "Mon ami, do you recall the locked drawer in Lord Cavendish's study?" Hastings nodded. "Yes. You said it might contain something important." Poirot smiled. "Indeed. And now, I require your assistance. We shall retrieve its contents." The room stirred with whispers as Poirot and Hastings exited. The study was just down the hall, its doors looming like sentinels of the past. Poirot moved with determination toward the great wooden desk and gestured for Hastings to pry open the locked drawer. Hastings hesitated. "You're certain?" Poirot chuckled. "Hastings, I am always certain." With a firm tug, Hastings forced the drawer open. Inside lay a single envelope, sealed with red wax. Poirot picked it up delicately and studied the seal. His fingers traced the imprint before he let out a soft "Ah." "What is it?" Hastings asked. Poirot turned to him with a knowing smile. "Mon ami, this is the final piece of the puzzle." He turned sharply on his heel. "Come, let us return. The murderer awaits." Back in the drawing room, all eyes were on Poirot as he re-entered, the envelope resting in his palm. "And now," he announced, "let us see what secrets our dear Lord Cavendish kept hidden." He broke the seal and unfolded the letter inside. His gaze swept across the page before he exhaled softly. "Ah, as I suspected." He lifted his eyes and met the gaze of one person in particular. "It is over, mon cher. The truth is written in ink, and so at last we reach the end of our mystery." A hush fell upon the room. Someone swallowed audibly. Someone's hands began to tremble, and someone, the murderer, sat frozen in their chair, knowing they had been caught. "Mes amis," Poirot declared, "the killer is among us, and their crime is about to be laid bare." Chapter 11. Poirot unmasks the truth. The drawing room was hushed, the air thick with anticipation. The fire crackled in the hearth, its warmth contrasting sharply with the chill that had settled over the occupants. Poirot stood at the center of the room, the recently unsealed envelope resting in his palm, like a delicate treasure. Hastings, standing by the mantelpiece, observed the tension written across every face. Lady Helena, her regal composure barely masking her nervous energy. Dr. Morton leaning forward with keen interest. Middleton, arms crossed, his jaw set tight. Alice the maid, her eyes darting toward the door as if she longed to escape. Mr. Finch, his fingers drumming rhythmically against the arm of his chair. And finally, Mrs. Stratton, her hands still wringing the edge of her shawl. Every one of them was waiting for Poirot to speak. But he did not rush. No, Hercule Poirot was a master of the dramatic pause. He let the weight of the moment settle before exhaling softly. "Mes amis," he said at last, This case has been one of shadows and whispers, of secrets buried beneath layers of deception. But as you all must surely know by now, Poirot does not abide shadows. The truth, no matter how well concealed, always reveals itself in the end. He lifted the envelope slightly, his gaze sweeping across the room. Inside this letter, we have the final testament of Lord Cavendish himself, a letter written in the days before his death, containing words that certain parties would have done anything to suppress. A faint rustle stirred among the listeners. No one spoke, but the tension tightened. Now, Poirot continued, before I reveal the contents of this document, let us reflect on the events leading to this moment. Lord Cavendish was a man of influence, a man who held secrets, not only his own but those of others. His death, seemingly a result of heart failure, was in fact something far more sinister. Hastings watched as Lady Helena's fingers twitched against the folds of her gown. Then we have young Denham, Poirot pressed on, the poor boy who sought the truth, who found himself dangerously close to it, and who, alas, paid the ultimate price. Alice the maid lowered her head slightly, as if afraid to meet Poirot's gaze. The question, mes amis, has never been whether these deaths were accidents, Poirot said softly. The question has always been, who among you feared the truth enough to kill for it? A sharp silence followed. Poirot let his words settle before stepping forward, his polished shoes making only the faintest sound against the rug. From the very beginning, he continued, there have been inconsistencies, the accounts given by each of you, the small contradictions, the things left unsaid, and yet the truth, it is always present. It only required the right eyes to see it. He lifted a finger. The first clue was in Lord Cavendish's very demeanor before his death. The second, in the reaction to his passing, and the third, mes amis, it was in the subtle manipulations of perception. Hastings furrowed his brow, feeling both exhilarated and impatient. Poirot, as ever, was weaving the final threads of his tapestry before presenting the complete picture. Someone in this room, Poirot said, his voice quieter now, has been very careful. Careful to play the part assigned to them. Careful to appear as something they are not. But there is always a mistake. Always. His gaze locked onto one person. The stillness in the room was absolute. And then, Poirot smiled, not kindly, but knowingly. Shall we bring this game to its inevitable conclusion, mon cher? He murmured, his eyes never leaving theirs. Someone inhaled sharply, someone's fingers clenched involuntarily, and Poirot, ever poised, straightened his cuffs before making his final declaration. Chapter 12. The Sinister Hourglass. A heavy silence filled the drawing-room. The fire had burned low in the hearth, casting flickering shadows along the paneled walls. The assembled suspects sat frozen in anticipation, some stiff with fear, others with defiance. Hercule Poirot, ever composed, straightened his cuffs and took a measured step forward. His voice, though soft, carried a gravity that demanded full attention. The time has come, he said, his dark eyes glinting. The hourglass has run empty, mes amis, and now we reveal the one who tipped it over. The assembled guests exchanged nervous glances. Poirot allowed the tension to stretch a moment longer, before he gestured toward the envelope in his hand. You see, mes amis, Lord Cavendish knew his life was in danger. He knew that a secret he possessed made him a target, and so, in his final days, he did what any man fearing betrayal would do. He left behind a record of his suspicions. He turned the envelope over, displaying the unbroken seal that bore the insignia of Cavendish House. This letter, written by the late Lord Cavendish himself, holds the final key to this mystery. But Poirot raised a finger. Before we read it, let us first consider what we already know. He paced slowly, his hands clasped behind his back. There were 3 great lies in this case, he said, his voice calm but sharp as a blade. 3 deceptions, carefully woven to obscure the truth. A murmur rippled through the room. The first lie was the manner of Lord Cavendish's death, Poirot continued. We were told he suffered from heart trouble. A convenient explanation, n'est-ce pas? And yet there was no history of serious illness, no sign of distress prior to that fatal evening. No, mes amis, Lord Cavendish was helped along to his end. Alice the maid gasped audibly, covering her mouth with trembling fingers. The second lie was the reason behind young Denham's death. Poirot pressed on, his gaze shifting toward the guests one by one. A tragic accident. A victim of carelessness? No, the boy saw something he was not meant to see. Lady Helena's fingers tightened against the arms of her chair. And finally, the third lie, the cleverest of them all. Poirot stopped abruptly, turning to face the group. The lie of appearance. A chill seemed to pass through the room. You see, mes amis, the culprit in this case has relied on something very simple. Our assumptions. They have played their role to perfection, making us see only what they wanted us to see. And yet, even the most skilled deceiver leaves behind traces of the truth. Poirot exhaled softly, his voice dropping just slightly. A word spoken too quickly, a detail overlooked, a reaction delayed by just half a second. It was enough. He turned sharply, his gaze locking onto a single individual. And that, mon ami, was your mistake. The person gasped audibly. The color drained from their face. You, Poirot's voice rang clear. You are the one who murdered Lord Cavendish. A collective intake of breath filled the room. The accused shook their head, their lips parting as if to protest. But Poirot continued, relentless. From the very beginning I suspected you, he said. Your alibi was too perfect, your explanations too rehearsed, and the moment I asked about Lord Cavendish's final days, I saw it. The briefest flicker of hesitation. Ah, but Poirot does not miss such things. He stepped forward, his voice commanding now. You administered a slow-acting poison, ensuring that the symptoms would mimic a natural heart failure. A poison that only someone with knowledge of certain compounds could have used. Poirot paused meaningfully, letting the implication sink in. The accused's hands trembled. Beads of perspiration glistened on their brow. And then, when young Denham stumbled upon the truth, when he found something incriminating, Poirot's voice dropped to a whisper. You've silenced him. A strangled sound escaped from the accused's throat. The murder weapon disguised, the motive hidden. But the truth, mon cher, it does not stay buried. Poirot held up the envelope one final time. Lord Cavendish named his killer before he died. The accused slumped back in their chair. A moment passed, then two. And then, like a dam breaking, they let out a shuddering breath. No. They whispered. No. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. The confession followed, halting, desperate, but undeniable. As the room erupted into hushed gasps and murmurs, Poirot simply nodded, the faintest shadow of sorrow in his eyes. Justice, mes amis, may sometimes be slow, but it is always certain. Hastings exhaled, watching as the scene unfolded before them. The murderer had been unmasked, the crime laid bare. And yet, Poirot did not gloat. There was no triumph in his expression, only a quiet certainty, a knowing that human nature, for all its darkness, could never truly escape the light. As the authorities arrived to make their arrest, Poirot turned to Hastings with a small, tired smile. Come, mon ami, he murmured. This mystery, she is finished, and I find myself in desperate need of a good tisane. Hastings chuckled despite himself. Another case solved, eh, Poirot? Poirot merely straightened his cuffs, his mustache twitching in satisfaction. Ah, but of course, Hastings. He cast a glance toward the dimming fire, and as always,